For the most updated version of the Glyphs RPG blueprint, tokens, accessories and resources, please visit www.glyphsrpg.com. Also visit 2ddice.com for our internationally popular D20 RPG coins and our other masterful coin works.
This is C.W. Smith, and welcome to Chapter 12 of the Glyphs RPG Blueprint. Now we're going to be talking about characters. So, player characters or PCs and NPCs, okay, how to create them from scratch and how to randomize them, okay? So, let's get into it real quick. Now, the basic instructions start on page 216 for creating a character from scratch, okay, for player characters, okay? So that's the Traveler. The Traveler is you, the player, the person creating a player character. That's the term that I have decided to use, okay? So in order to play Glyphs, obviously you need to have a character to create. So that's what we're going to be exploring here. So rather than me reading the next several pages, going step by step for instructions, I'd rather actually show you one of my character booklets from one of my veteran level characters. Okay, we're going to get to that in a minute, but real quick, just want to show you something. Okay, so first, obviously you have your biographical information, okay, the character's backstory, what the character's about, all that neat stuff, okay, physical description, etc. Okay, obviously you first have to choose your character's race, okay, your race type. Okay, we've already covered that in detail. Okay, and then you choose your archetype, just like we covered in the archetypes chapter. Okay, pretty straightforward. Now, real quick, like I said, instead of me going line by line here, I don't think that's very efficient for what I'm trying to show you. Just want to point something out here. Now, a lot of these they function based on a point allotment system. I think it's very simple and very effective, okay? If it works, why change it, right? That's the way I see it. So, let's take a look at configuration quite a bit. Those of you game masters, architects, you should be familiar with these next several pages, okay, to help your fellow players out. But I just want to point something out. So we have neophyte campaigns, veteran campaigns, and adept campaigns. You're going to see those descriptions here a lot. Okay, so neophyte campaign is essentially your entry level, bare bones, very simple, very light, level 1 type of a campaign. Okay, so a very basic, bare bones character from scratch would be considered a neophyte type character. Okay. A veteran campaign is your intermediate level campaign. So characters that are created for veteran campaigns are a little bit more amped up than neophyte characters, a little bit more prepared, got a little bit more techniques and abilities, prepared to handle an intermediate level of threats. For, ideally you want to use them for conventions or for shorter campaigns. If you're going to create a veteran character from scratch, I recommend that. I do that. Okay, and finally, an adept level campaign. So your epic level, your most intense setting, okay, your most dangerous setting, obviously from scratch you'd be creating the most powerful type of character. So you're going to see these 3 campaign settings here quite a bit in the steps, because that's going to determine the point allotment you get for each segment of your character's being, I guess you could say. Okay, so as an example, let's look at attributes. Okay. So for a neophyte campaign, you get a total of 33 points that are distributed amongst your attributes, and I'm going to show you that here shortly on my character sheet. Okay, for a veteran campaign, you get 36. Real quick, like I said, players don't need to be too familiar with this, but definitely do. Okay, so like I said, next few pages, same thing here. You got point allotment system based on the type of campaign that your character is being created for. So just make sure to be familiar with that. Okay, same for techniques, powers, weapon proficiencies. It tells you what they can and can't have based on the campaign setting that you're playing, and finally leveling, okay, and how to calculate certain levels, which in Glyphs we have a couple different types of levels that we look at rather than tying everything to one static figure. Okay, so now that I've summarized that briefly, okay, like I said, architects should be familiar with those pages and how the point allotments work, but for everybody else, I'd rather get into the character booklet itself with one of my veteran characters to show you everything in practice. Okay, so this here is a veteran level character. Okay, like we mentioned about in the campaign settings, neophyte, veteran, adept, etc. This is a veteran level or intermediate character that I built. Okay, now I'm going to go over this step by step on the sheet that I have here on the whole booklet. I got 4 sheets here to show you in a very clinical manner, just so you understand how all this data ties together. Okay, so first, character's name, we have Magnus of Tristi. Okay, we're playing a vampire. Okay, so if you'll notice, each character sheet that you can download on glyphsrpg.com for free is race type driven. Okay, and I'm going to show you why that is in a second. So just wanted to show that out here. So Magnus, okay, being a vampire, has his affinities listed here. Okay, that's covered in the race type chapter. Okay, he doesn't have any karma points assigned to him. Okay, combat level, he's a level 9 character in terms of his combat ability. Okay, and the way that's calculated, as we're going to go over here in the next few, is simply averaging together the character's arsenal level, the powers level, and techniques level. Okay, and that's done basically to assess an overall level of threat against monsters that the architect throws at you. Okay, that's how we come up with that number. Okay, it is a range of potential numbers as opposed to a static figure per se. Okay, so this can fluctuate a little bit. Okay, now on the first page you'll notice race type perks. Okay, every character sheet has a list of perks. Okay, so be sure to keep those in mind when you're creating your character. Some of them have additional modifier bonuses and other things like that you want to factor in. So that's why I point that out. In this case, the vampire's only vulnerabilities are the destruction of his heart or enough sunlight exposure. Okay, so that's what that means here. Okay, you'll see here I have my endowment selected. So this is a deviant race type, meaning a much more powerful race type than the ordinary. Okay, so out of 5 possible endowments to choose from the vampire, I chose my 3. So vampiric bite, daylight, and regeneration. Okay, those are covered in the vampire section of the race types chapter. Okay, you want to create your character's tastes. You want to choose 3 of the favorite types of food that your character likes to consume, and that affects ether recovery. That's why that's important. Notoriety level, okay, that can fluctuate throughout the game, as you'll learn about in the encounters chapter. But by default, you're generally incognito, unless the architect says otherwise. Okay, personality, okay, that's going to determine the your character's attitude, their mindset, their overall personality, okay, and how they match up to other NPCs. That's why that's important to know. In this case, Magnus is an air type personality, so more intellectual, more analytical. Okay, polarity, he's disagreeable. Okay, so one step away from neutral, so he's a little bit of a bad guy. Okay, he is an executioner. Okay, that's his title here. He's a blood-risen executioner. Now, that's on the character sheet. It's listed as a title because I don't feel the need to attach myself to any one particular class per se. So that's why that's put there. Because really in Glyphs, we're about creating characters. All right, so when we come up with a more creative title, I feel that's a little bit more personal to that particular character. So in this case, he's a blood-risen executioner, so it's a vampiric type executioner character. Okay, so it's up to you to come up with your own. Instead of just sticking with the traditional ones, I found it more to be a little bit more immersive, if you ask me. That's my opinion. Okay, so on to the creation process. First, you want to select your archetypes here. Okay, if you were just choosing one class archetype, you would just put number 1. In this case, that would already be done for the vampire by default. This particular character is a freestyle character, so it's a step above blended, meaning I'm picking and choosing different components from a couple different archetypes, from 3 to be exact. So first off, because I'm a vampire, by default, I'm also a Marvel as my dominant archetype. Okay. On the character sheet for the Marvel and for deviant race types, number 1 is already marked there for you. Okay. But because I also want to use the Marvel's powers for this character, I put an X next to it. And I also want to have access to the Butcher's warfare techniques. So I put a little X next to there. Okay. So that's why this looks that way. Now, before I continue, I just want to say this. Okay. This is absolute idiot proof as possible when I did these character sheets. So every single section just about has a little set of instructions next to it to tell you exactly what to do. So there shouldn't really be any confusion as to what to do. But believe it or not, people still ask me. They're still confused somehow. I don't know how they are. So that's why I'm going to show you how everything looks like here as opposed to just reading the book to you, okay? So enough about that. Let's move on to the next section. So first, like I said, you got your bio information, all that good stuff here. Okay, you got you. Okay, let's move on to modifiers and attributes. Probably the most important part in most role-playing games, you know, your stats, okay? So here, you'll notice to the left, I have my prime attributes, okay? Remember, we learned about that in the attributes chapter. So what makes a vampire, in this case, more powerful than other races, okay? So you'll notice here in this section, you see prime multiplier here, here, and here, okay? That's because when you're creating your attributes, once you put in your basic attributes, you're going to multiply them by that figure that gives you to make them even more powerful here. So in other words, what I tell people when they're creating a new character is simply put in 2s in every single attribute. There's a total of 15 attributes, right? So 15 possible. I say put 2 in as a recommendation. That puts you at 30 automatically, and then you just adjust it based on the level of campaign that you're doing. So in this case, I had 36 points to choose from because I'm playing a veteran campaign in this example. Okay, so I factor all that in here, and then once everything's in by default, then I factor in my multiplier attributes here. Otherwise, everything else stays the same. So that's really all there is to it. Very simple math involved, and this is done to differentiate, like I said, different character races against other races. So the vampire here is very powerful. So if this were a normal person, his strength would be 2, so average, okay? So for a vampire, he's considered average. But he's also 4 times stronger than the average human, okay? That's essentially what this means here. Okay, IQ, he's an average, you know, he has average IQ, okay, for a vampire. Okay, so that would have been 2. I would have put in, but I multiply it by 2, and that becomes 4. That's how I get these numbers. So this side is your multiplier side. Everything else stays the same. Okay, up to 4. You can't put anything higher than a 4 by default. Okay, when you're putting these in originally, that's what we talked about in the attributes chapter. Okay, let's get on to modifiers. Now, modifiers are generated by averaging together certain attributes. Okay, so as an example, for initiative, I'm going to average together finesse and reaction. Okay, so add them together, divide it by 2, and round it up. In Glyphs, the general norm is you always round numbers up. So these numbers here are calculated. Okay, on the character sheet, it tells you what's averaged together. It's already done for you, and you round your figure up. Okay, so let's say I'm looking at fate. Well, that's simply luck plus 4. Round it up, it comes to 4. Okay, so that's how the modifiers are generated. They serve very specific purposes, a lot of which is going to be in combat and very context-sensitive situations. All right. Now, here in this section here, each race type is going to be slightly different here in regards to movement, but generally speaking, as in this case, your movement on land speed is going to equal your speed modifier. Okay, see that? And here, in this case, the vampire, it's land divided by 3, okay? And then you round it up a little bit. So that's a 3 for water movement speed. Okay, now, before I move into the next sheet, let me just show you something here. What's really cool about Glyphs is, like I said, there's options for everybody, and that includes budget. Now, I recommend purchasing the optional grid board. It's got both grids on them, very nice quality board. But those of you who are more budget conscious, you already have your action grid printed on your character sheet here for you. I found that a lot of my players like to go this route. Number one, it's a lot more convenient to have it right then and there with your character sheet. That was factored into the design, and I must say it's been pretty successful. Okay, not only for aesthetically, but the fact here that the paper of the sheet actually has a nice little, just the amount of friction when you're doing your token slides. So I found that a lot of my players prefer this. See, nice little friction, still very accurate, as you can see when I'm sliding. Okay, but it's got just the right friction to keep it from sliding too far. So a lot of players prefer this method. Okay, let's see, anything else here we need to cover here? No, that's pretty much it here for the most part. Now, in here, like I said, bioinformation, I've got my vampire's age. He's 65, which is young for a vampire. We all know that. Gender, height, size, weight. Okay, stuff that you should already be able to do from your head. That's not a big deal. Capacity, that's carrying capacity. Now, that's calculated through the race type strength modifier or attribute, and that's in the races chapter. So in the race type chapter, there is a chart that gives you different breakdowns for lifting capacity. Now in this case, a vampire is 4 times strong than somebody with average strength. So that's why I came up with 600. Okay, H2H means hand-to-hand combat. So in hand-to-hand combat, by default, unless you're doing a trained technique punch or kick, which is in the techniques chapter described, marks damage, which is calculated by the number symbol. Okay, now most people have a number 1 damage. In this case, the vampire is 4 times stronger, so we're going to have him do 4 times his damage, plus 5. Now, where did I get 5 from? So, when hand-to-hand combat, you look at your impact modifier and you add that in. Okay, that's how much extra damage you're going to do. So, the vampire is very strong here. Okay, hand-to-hand proficiency, plus 0. Okay, so he doesn't get an extra bonus to that. He's not a martial artist or anything like that. Currency. Now, we are going to talk about that, obviously, and there's a whole chapter dedicated to currency and how I come up with these figures, but I would just write it there. In this case, he has 314 GP, and that's measured in grams. Now, in the currency chapter, you're going to see a lot of currencies have the option for ounces or grams or carats. So, depending on what setting and what world you're playing in, that can have an impact on how much your character has to carry around. So I found grams to be pretty popular, tiny gold coins. So that's essentially what we're trying to reflect here. Okay, so now let's move on to the second page of the character booklet. The let's see, what do we got here? The status module. Okay, now let's see. Status module basically does a couple things. Number 1, it tells me what I have in inventory for weaponry, for equipment and items. Okay, it tells me, it gives me here a chart of my character's bodily sections when I get damaged. So let's say I take a blow to the shoulder, okay, and all I would do is simply mark the level of damage here visually instead of counting numbers, because if you only take so much damage, you're going to be pretty bad anyway. So we're doing a very visual reference here. This chart here tells you what it is. So 2 for tissue, 4 for skeleton, and 1 for vitals. Like we're going to learn in the like we learned a while ago when we were doing the attack damages, but also we're going to learn in detail in the structure chapter. Okay, so that's just here for your reference. So 2 points for tissue, 4 for skeleton, and 1 for vitals. So depending on what kind of damage you take, you simply mark it. And that's it. That's all this is for. So it looks sophisticated. It's actually a lot simpler in practice. Okay? This section here at the bottom only applies if you're using a force field. Okay, so what type of force field? How much HP does it have? That's all there is to it. Marks here if you're tracking soft damage. The bottom left corner, ether. Okay, total amount of ether here. In this case, Magnus has 96 ether points. Okay, it's a pretty nice amount. He's a vampire, so he does get more. Okay, and here, you want to mark your level of comfort. Now that, depending how comfortable or overwhelmed your character is, that can have an impact on ether recovery. That's why that's important. In this case, active is generally the default setting for that. So the average adventurer is usually pretty active. So that's a way I recommend people starting off. Okay? So now, let's look at melee weaponry. Okay? We have ranged weapon and rate weaponry also. So this is where you would track the weapons, and all their stats are here. only has melee weapons, okay? So he wants to get very upfront and personal with his enemies, okay? So here we have a Morningstar whip, okay, like a chain whip type weapon, a bastard sword, and bracer claws, because I didn't choose a vampire endowment for claws, so he has to compensate for that. Okay, the properties of each weapon here, the proficiency, okay, the effectiveness, range, damage, and advantage are here. So these are my character's melee weapons. Okay, here I want to show you, take your attention to items and equipment. This section here is my approach to inventory management. Now, if you'll notice here, I don't have a slew of items here like you do in another game. You got to track every item. I don't do that here. My approach basically is to have players put the name of the skill that they're using, because obviously they're probably going to have items that are related to that skill if it uses an item. So in this case, Magnus has rope climbing, mountain climbing, and music. He likes to play a violin. So that's what I'm tracking here. Okay, the rest of it, the minutia, is up to the game master. I don't really care. But that's whoever's running the campaign. You can certainly add more, especially if they're really important to the story. That option's certainly there. Now, another thing here in the inventory is how you're carried, where and how your items are carried. So some characters only have belts and pouches. Some characters, like Magnus, has small bags and small packs. Okay, so the average adventurer. And then here, this is somebody who has backpacks or briefcases or heavy luggage type. So there's different ways you can configure inventory depending on the GM. Okay, now this section here, the bottom right section, these are your sustenance metrics. Now, these are optional metrics, and they're only there if the architect wants to instill a lot of realism in the campaign. So, what do I mean? Here, we're tracking blood, so how much blood loss, pain levels, okay, hunger, thirst, recovery, and shelter. These are only used and marked if those metrics are being used in the campaign. But like I said, mostly I leave them optional. I rarely ever use them, but there are times I will have to use them if the characters are in inclement weather, or they're in a lot of pain, or they're in the desert and they're out of water or something like that. Those options are there. In this case, Magnus' campaign, we're going to be using all these. So they're marked yes, they're active. Okay. Then here you have the apparel section. Okay. Are we going to be considering apparel, okay, the type of clothing that the character is wearing, as a factor for the campaign? Okay. A lot of people aren't going to factor that in at all. They just want to look cool. That's fine. But in this campaign, we are. So that's active as a yes. Okay. So let's see. Here I've got the apparel's index values like we talked about. Now, in a veteran campaign, as an example, I get 7 points to choose from and distribute it how I want. So 2 for environment, 2 for image, and 3 for comfort. So in this case, Magnus has average, okay, 2 out of 4, remember? So 4 is the maximum. So average, environment, and image index, and he's got a higher priority on comfort. Okay, so that's essentially what this describes. Again, a lot of this here is optional, and you'll see here yes or no if you want to mark that. That's what I did with my character. Okay, so that pretty much covers that. Oh, one more thing real quick, very important. Arsenal level. Arsenal level, like I briefly mentioned on the combat level on the first page, is one of the contributing numbers towards your character's overall combat level. Okay, so here in this little black section, it shows you exactly how to calculate that. Okay, so very simple. Just take your proficiency times your EFF rank for each weapon. Okay, factor them all in, and you come up with that figure just like I did. Okay, that tells me how tough you are with certain weapons and how effective you are overall in battle. That's what this is meant to do. Okay, so next step here, page 3 real quick. Okay, the abilities module. Okay, so page 3 is going to have all the abilities listed. Okay, so page 3, let's look at skills real quick. So exclusive skills. Okay, in the characters chapter, like I said, it lists the different points or the gambits that you have to choose from to allot to skills. Okay, in a veteran campaign, I have 10 for exclusive and 15 for lifestyle skills. Okay, so 10 dots are distributed based on is using butcher skills and marvel skills. Skill. Okay, that's how this is broken down. So from 1 to 5 are what the dots go to. That indicates your skill level. So as an example, for the butcher exclusive skills, I'm a level 3 in spatter. I'm a level 2 in stock. For marvel skills, I have a level 2 in recharge. So that's an example of exclusive skills. For lifestyle skills, I have 15 points to distribute same way, and this just shows you how I'm leveled up here. Okay, and real quick on the skill level. Now, for skills and for techniques also, that's going to tell you exactly how many you can have. So the skill level is equivalent to the amount of dots that you can distribute. So I just wanted to show that out real quick. Okay, let's look at techniques real quick. So technique level is simply the amount of techniques that I'm eligible to create my character with. In this case, a veteran campaign allows me 5. I have chosen 5 here. Okay, so consumes has a space for experience. So as I use and develop that technique, once I hit my mark, I can choose another technique. Now, these are mostly default techniques that are available in the book, except for this one, Teleport Strike. That's one that I made up specifically for Magnus. Basically, that technique lets me execute a focused attack or freeform attack the moment Magnus teleports towards an enemy. Okay, so I would have to expend an additional 10 ether points to be able to do that. That's essentially what that means. That's a neat thing about techniques, is you can stack them on with other things. Okay, so just to show you that real quick, powers here are listed. Okay, so in this case I have 10 levels to choose from. So I've distributed them. I've chosen 3 powers to max out and 1 at level 1. Okay, so that's how, those are my chosen powers. Those are the ether points it consumes. These are the levels that Magnus is in those powers. And over here, because powers are very target driven, you have the option to mark the specific target, so you don't have to keep going back and forth through the book. So in other words, for me to successfully teleport, number one, my token has to be able to hit the circle in the action grid, the large circle from the G logo, okay, in that example, and I'm at level 1, so that just shows you how that works, okay, very straightforward, okay, probably the easiest section, okay. Now, after page 3, that's honestly where most people stop making their characters. I don't recommend going into page 4 for new characters unless you're going to have a relic, like a magic item or an alien artifact that you really need to track. Page 4 for character creation I consider optional. I don't have my folks do it when I run a game, and it's something, like I said, it's there for characters that are developing. So have your players have one on hand, and that's something that they're going to use to track their character's progress. That's what page 4 is essentially meant for. I'm only showing you here because it's a very clinical type tutorial, so I want you to see the applications. Okay, so page 4 of the booklet is the assets module. Okay, so here I have an example. So here you have treasure. So if your character has hordes of treasure stashed somewhere, that's where you would put that. Okay, they own property. Okay, same thing here. Okay, in this example, my character has a vehicle. Okay, that's not really in the default gambits. I don't think it needs to be. I think it's very subjective based on the campaign. Okay, but in this case, my character has a black noble steed, so a really awesome black badass type horse, right? That's what this is. Okay, we're going to learn in the vehicles chapter specific numerical metrics. That's what these are here. So velocity, mileage, horsepower, size. That's mentioned here. Okay, that's for me to know as a player. And finally, what that horse is worth. He's worth 76 gold points in grams. Okay, so that's my horse's stats if I wanted to track that. Okay, a lot of people don't even bother, but it's there for your option, especially when you go to other types of vehicles. Finally, my favorite part, okay, relics. Now, a lot of thought went into this, okay. So here you've got your relic name, okay, what it's worth in your game's currency if possible. Now here, relic location, the bodily location where that relic is. So is it on the character's body? Is it mixed up in their weapon pack somewhere? Or in their inventory, okay, with the rest of their junk? Okay, so in this case, Magnus has what I call the Helion robe. Okay, its value is 114 gold. He's wearing it on his body, obviously, because it's a robe. He's wearing it. Okay. Here you have EP usage and EP total. Okay. You put that here. In this case, it doesn't apply to the robe because it's always functioning. Okay. Specifically, the functions of this relic. Now, it simply converts sunlight into usable ether points at a rate of 1 ether point per hour. So, Magnus is a vampire. Okay. Obviously, shouldn't be out in the sun, but if he's protected enough, in my scenario, then he's okay. He won't burn to a crisp, and at the same time, while he's wearing that robe, he can absorb a little bit of ether at a time. So this is just an example of things you can do, okay, and this is where you would put it as far as relics. Finally, on page 4, you have allies, interests, and contractors would go here. Any affiliations your characters, assigned with. Character, he was part of a disbanded executioner clan of Tristi. That's where he gets his surname from. Okay, so just a little history about him here. Now, as your character grows, like I said, a lot of this is going to be filled out over time, any major accomplishments that you did. So this is something, like I said, page 4 is more for long-term development. But, that pretty much covers it. So now, that's all there is for the character booklet. Okay, it's a lot easier for me to show you in practice than just reading the book step by step. I think that's got a little bit more value to it. Okay, so that's all you really need to know for player characters. Like I said, one final thing on that. Now, on the Glyphs website, okay, all character sheets are available for free, but also, aside from the instructions themselves that are on the character sheet, I had a couple players ask me for a map on what steps to do first, something that I recommend doing, and also where the pages are to reference in the book. I thought that was a great idea. I do come off as a little bit direct, but honestly, I'm a very good listener, and I listen to my players, and I thought it was a great idea. So that's on there on the website right now. Okay, so there's on the resources sheet, section, there is a quick map to show you how to fill the sheet out, and more importantly, what pages to reference if you ever get stuck. Okay, so that's pretty much all there is to it. Now, we're going to move on to the more randomized section of character creation.
Talk about the randomization of different aspects of character generation. This is nice if game masters want to create a character on the fly and go into really granular detail on specific character traits. Now, I do not recommend doing or creating a character completely from scratch with this because of the sheer amount of time it would take to randomize every little detail, but that option is there for game masters who do want to spend. Actually kind of neat, but like with anything random, the more aspects that you randomize, the more skewed and awkward your character might become, so just keep that in mind. I only recommend using this as a one-off thing, if you want to spice up your adventure and change things up a little bit without having to resort to a list of already preset variables. So that's what's nice about the token, whereas instead of going through page to page, looking up, if you roll a number, you got to go through all these details to try to find your result. It's already in your hands, but like I always say, and I've said this before, make sure you're familiar with the token and you're comfortable using the symbols, because from this point on, we're going to start getting into more of the actual usage of the glyphs themselves for randomization. So, from page 221 in the characters chapter through the rest of the chapter 221 on, there is a lot of detailed formulas in terms of how to get very specific results with the token. So I'm just going to go over a few of them here. It's not my intent to show you every single step in here. It's just there's no time. That's beyond my scope here. But let me just show you how this works. Now, one thing I want to point out also, especially in regards to the element glyphs, okay? I don't know if you've noticed by now, but there is a logical order to these in terms of intensity. So here we have carbon, then we have air, water, and fire. So when we use these, each element in my mind has a different value in terms of numbers. So carbon, you're going to see in the instructions a lot, has the lowest value. Then there's fire, and then last we have air. So a lot of the formulas you're going to see and the randomization for character creation are going to have that hierarchy, if you will. You'll see what I mean as you get into it. So, as an example, let's say I'm generating a random character and I want to know what race type he is. Well, I'm going to spend the token, and guess what? My air glyph here tells me that's an elder character because that's the highest intensity of the elements. If I were to spend that again, and let's say I got carbon, then that character would be an infant character. Again, randomization can skew a lot of things. Maybe you don't want that kind of character, but that's the detail we can go into. Okay, so let's say I want to know about this character's race. What race am I using? Well, you're going to see, and this is why I have the board here, that sometimes you want to use the Omni grid here to get certain variables for your results. So the token does not have letters on it, so we're going to need to use the Omni grid, the letters on the Omni grid, to kind of help pinpoint out, rather than resorting to a dictionary of pre-generated results, because this is a flexible system. We got to be very flexible. So let's see what race we're going to roll up here. So letter clue here, Z. That doesn't give me anything. Let's get another letter clue here. Let's just lightly spin that here. Okay, G, and we're getting a little bit closer. Okay, A. Okay, what do we got here? Let's get some more. So generally you want at least 3, maybe up to 5 letter clues to give you a really good result. That's nothing. And let's see. So let's just see here. You don't have to spin it a lot, just toss it in there. The idea is not to look at any one particular part of the grid, on the Omni grid. Toss it in there randomly without focusing on anything, and that's what you want to do. So we have Z, G, A, U. Those are my letter clues I'm going to run with. So let's see. Not really a thing comes to mind, but for some reason to me, letter G jumps out of all these letter clues. Again, there is no right or wrong answer per se. You want to go with the result that's in your mind right off the bat. For me, cyborg comes up to mind. So letter G is in cyborg, right? To me, that comes to mind over anything else. So right off the bat, that's the result I'm going to go with. Again, this is a subjective process. I can't stress that enough. The idea is to use the token and the grid system to generate clues and from your mind off the bat. So right off the bat, let's say that this character is a cyborg, and my element grid, in this case, my element glyph here is fire. So it's a young cyborg character, let's just say. So that's what we're going to do. If I want to know what sex this character is, what gender, then spin the token, flip it, randomize it however you want. Okay, positive side is masculine, negative side is feminine. So in this case, I've got a negative, so it's a female young cyborg is what this translates to. Okay, just an example. Okay, now let's take another look here, another example. So let's say I want to know what archetype I'm looking at. Okay, got the race type already defined. What archetype am I looking at? So letter clues once again. Okay, so here H. Okay, you want, 3 to 5. Okay, the book says 3, just whatever you're comfortable with. You want to randomize it enough. So C, so H, C are my letter clues so far. And I'm going to be honest with you, that's as far as I need to go for his H and C. The first thing that come to mind is butcher. Oh, so here we've already narrowed that down a bit. So now I know this random character is a butcher character, a barbarian of some kind is what we could go with, and you go from there. So a young female cyborg barbarian character is what we're going with here, and that's essentially how this process works. It works for the game master's purposes on the fly. So experiment, I cannot stress that enough. Experiment, practice, get comfortable using the glyphs and interpreting them. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of calculations in here that you can use as you see fit. So we can do attributes. Let's look at behavior profile real quick. So what is this character's polarity? Okay, first, let's spin it or flip it, doesn't matter. We're gonna read the token here. Okay, so what is this guy? So we're gonna look at our polarity glyphs. Okay, in this case, X means neutral, so it's a neutral character, and his behavior profile. So what kind of personality is this character? So element glyphs for this. Okay, and in my case, I got fire. So very fiery, very aggressive, maybe a warrior type personality. So certainly something that makes sense for the butcher type character. Okay, what about wealth? So what kind of, how much money does this character have? What kind of background does it come from? Etc., etc. So wealth bracket, randomly. So here we're going to look at the states glyphs. So in this case, I just generated the square, so poor. So this character is poor, or in this case, she's young, so she comes maybe from a poor family. So these are clues you can all put together very easily to quickly create not just a character, but a nice overall persona and maybe even a backstory to this. So that's what I just wanted to show you here. Okay, you can get into apparel articles, condition, let's say, what is this character wearing? Okay, off the bat, randomly, if you want to go there. So, letter clues. U, okay. Let's do a couple more letter clues. I'm just randomly tossing it in there. B, okay, and let's just go here a little bit and just drop that in there like that. Okay. Okay, so UBK, what do we have here? Right off the bat, the quickest things that come to mind, U and B give me the most. So I'm going to say burlap. U and B, that's a pretty common material. So this character is wearing burlap in this example. And what kind of condition, or what kind of condition are we looking at here? Okay, so let's see, positive side means good condition, so it's in pretty good condition. And let's say I want to go into detail about the apparel itself, so about this character. So what features does the clothing have? So we're going to go look at the states glyphs, and this is all, in this example, is page 225. So the apparel condition I'm looking at is the features. Okay, in this case, is a triangle states glyphs, so it's got a design of some kind on it. So you could figure out what kind of design would be appropriate for that character. So there's a pattern that's maybe significant to that character's tribe or race. Or this just gives you a clue here. Okay, you can get into weapons, weapon grades. So as an example, weapon grades. Okay, what kind of weapons does this character have? So back to what I was saying about the element glyphs and intensity. Carbon is always the least, then fire, then water, and then air is the greatest intensity. So as an example to weapons, that implies small, middle, heavy, and great. Okay, so right off the bat, what kind of intensity weapon does this character have, or have at their disposal, or whatever, or can they use? So the fire glyph tells me middle, so they're trained with a middle weapon and so forth. And then on page 227.4, you can get into more detail as to weapons and weapon modifications, armor, all that good stuff. Okay, but I just wanted to show you, most importantly, as a shortcut, how the intensities work with the element glyphs. That's going to make sense here as you get into it. Okay, let's see here, all the way through step 16. That's more related to character powers, their armor, their equipment, their ether. If you need to, take a look through that. If you need to ever use those calculations, they're there for you. Now I want to get into the character's actual physical features. So now we're going to get into the part that I have noticed myself that a lot of GMs use when they want to randomize something, because it's very visual in nature and seems to be very practical. So let's talk about that real quick. So on page 232, we're going to talk about randomizing a character's bio and their general description and stuff that, it's pretty quick to randomize. A lot less calculation involved. So, okay, let's talk about randomizing a character's body structure. Number one, you want to make sure that you're familiar with your character's attribute scores. But let's say off the fly, you're describing a random NPC without looking at any attributes. Not that it really matters in that case. So, randomly describing somebody's body structure. Okay, off the bat, you're going to look in this example at the states glyphs. Okay, so in this case, I got in this context implies that the character is stocky, so a very stocky build. Okay. Let's look at skin tone and texture if you want to go. Again, you can get really granular as far as detail with this. That depends on how far you need to go, but it's there for you once you understand how to use it. So, in this example, skin tone and texture. So we're going to look at the states glyphs, and we're also going to keep in mind the face that it lands on, the positive or negative, and you'll see that's why those symbols in there on 232. So, just going to randomly toss it and spin it. Okay. So, in this case, from my perspective, we're going to look at the circle states glyph. So this character, okay, for skin tone and texture, that glyph in that context tells me, let's see, what face is that on? That's a positive face. So this character has spotted skin. Okay, this particular character, if I'm describing their skin, that's how my interpretation would be. It's got spotted skin based on that result. So this is a stocky character with spotted skin. Right off the bat, these clues tells you that. Okay, let's go into hair color. Okay, let's see. Hair color, very easy. So just use the Omni Grid. Just spin it, flip it, toss it, however you want to randomize it. That wasn't very good. Let's do that again. So here, that's close enough. Let's just toss it in there, not even paying attention. Let's say yellow. So this character has yellow hair. Okay. And I want to go into more detail than just that. I don't want to just know the hair color, okay? Now again, about colors, when you think common sense applies, that you can interpret that as dye or war paint or anything like that. So again, common sense, but I know you're going to see some examples in there that tell you that. So this character could have yellow dye in their hair, or they could be blonde, or natural colored hair, whatever. That's up to you to decide as a game master, okay? So I want to know more about the hair randomly, because I really want to get into detail here. So let's look at the states glyphs. Okay, just spin it or toss it however you want. And in this case, I'm looking at my states glyphs, and my result is triangle. Okay, and again, same thing here. We're looking at the face it fell on. In this case, we landed on the negative face. So triangle, negative. It's wrinkly hair. Oh, wait, never mind. I'm looking at the wrong thing, duh. I'm looking at triangle here. It's a curly hair. So triangle, the negative aspect of that, in this context, is curly. So this character has curly hair, okay? If you want to go into detail of how long it is, very simple. Just look at your polarity glyphs, okay? That'll give you a rough clue as to how long it is. So this is double negative, and on page 232, it'll give you a chart. So double negative, it will tell you it's about an inch long, so relatively short. So inch long, curly hair, and as we've gone through these clues so far, that gives you a very good description of this character randomly. Again, I don't recommend doing all of these at once unless you want to build a character completely from scratch before you play the game, okay? These are designed to give your players clues on the fly if you just want to, change things up a little bit. That's what this is meant for. But you can definitely create a character from scratch, completely from random, with the steps here, okay? So let's look at facial features. We can even talk about that. So let's look at this character's facial and head structure, okay? So again, we're going to look at the states glyphs, which are going to be widely used here. So in this case here, the circle tells me he's got a very rounded facial structure. Okay. Now, let's see. Let's look at let's see if the character has facial hair. Do they have facial hair? Yes or no? Okay. In this case is no, because it's negative. But let's say it's yes. Let's say it lands on the positive side and it's yes. I want to know more about the facial hair. So let's look at states glyphs and learn more about it. So here, the internal portion of the circle tells me it's trim. So maybe this character's got very trim, neat facial hair. Okay, eyes. Okay, we can look at things like eyes. Okay, we're going to look at the permutation glyphs for that. Okay, so let's see here. We have the skewed. So in this case, they're slanted in this example. Okay, mouth and teeth. Let's look at, randomly how this character's mouth and teeth may look. So let's see here. We're going to look at permutation glyph again. Okay, it's still skewed. So it's got a very bowed mouth structure. That's one way you could describe it. Okay, let's say that, let's go into teeth now. So that's the mouth, teeth. What do the teeth look like? Okay, we're going to go here. Okay, so we got the stretched permutation glyph. So these are actually very even, very neat teeth. That's what we're describing here in this particular example. Okay, now let's see here. One more piece I want to talk about before we get into random antagonists, which is very important. Okay, narrative is very simple. The bio, the narrative, where does this character come from? What do they like? Things like that. So on page 234, which is step 19, if you want to look at it that way, we're looking at bio narrative. So let's look at this character's past. Okay, instead of having this vast list of character backgrounds and jobs and all that, the idea here is just to give you a clue of what their past is rooted in this case. So we're going to use the encounter glyphs here, the function glyphs. Okay, so let's spin that real quick. And in this case, I'm looking here, conflict. The conflict glyph tells me that their past is rooted in strife, so war, death, maybe their family member was killed, maybe their father was a warrior or something, or maybe they were a warrior in this case. Okay, so their background, their past, their job is rooted in conflict and war and so forth, or death. Okay, that's just to give you a general example. Okay, let's see what else. So that's pretty much it. You can go into more detail with that here. There's more instructions on page 234. Now, let's talk about random antagonist aspects. Now, this is a nice, easy, quick way to get a general idea of what the bad guy is going to do, okay? Or good guy if you're playing bad guys, you know what I mean. So, real quick, let's talk about main things I want to look at here that define an antagonist, okay? First, you have their objectives, okay? So what's their driving purpose? Okay, then we're going to talk about ploys. What are the key methods and resources that they actually use to pull off their plan? And finally, operation. Okay, so is there a government, an order, a culture, a higher force, a deity, whatever that they operate within? Okay, so those are the things you want to consider when creating an antagonist. Okay, so we're going to use a glyph to help narrow some things down here. So first, let's talk about objectives. So all you do, just spin, and in this case, we're going to interpret the element glyphs to reveal the clue. So in this case, my result was air. So this character's objective has to do with knowledge and personal power. So this guy he's after knowledge, he's after a secret book, a power, he wants to gain more personal power. That's what this guy's main objective is, okay? Just by that clue tells me that, okay? What about ploys? Okay, so what are some of the key methods that this character, this NPC, this antagonist uses? Okay, we're going to use the function glyphs to help determine that. Okay, so spin, toss it, however you choose. And in this case, I got the wrench glyph. Okay, so we're talking in this case science and technology. So this character uses and manipulates science and technology to help further pursue their quest for knowledge and power is what this essentially means. So this is a villain who's a mad scientist, who's a technocrat of some kind, and that's what these clues tell me. And they're after knowledge. They're looking for something, is what this tells me. Okay, it's up to you how you interpret it, but these clues here, they're for a reason. They do work pretty well, and that's what I've come with so far for this character. So let's talk about operation real quick. So how does this antagonist operate? Okay, randomly, let's spin. States glyph, so the square. Okay, the linear, the square. So in this case, this is a lone operative type character. So a lone crazy person You know, in my case, I would say this is definitely the archetypal mad scientist type of a villain that we've created here just with these clues. Okay? Now, you can get more granular than that, page 30. You know, if you want to get more granular, that's fine, but this just gives you a general rundown on how to use the token on generating clues, okay? So that pretty much covers it for this chapter. Again, take your time, learn the token, learn the glyphs, be comfortable with it. Don't overthink it. That's all I can say, and I keep stressing that to everybody. Try not to overthink it. The token and the symbols speak to you, the game master, and ultimately it's up to you how you use it to your advantage, okay? So thank you for joining me today, and now let's get into the combat chapter, one of my personal favorite ones.